Her name was Captain Sarah Whitmore, though those who served beside her simply called her Whit. She never cared much for titles, though she had earned every stripe stitched into her uniform. What mattered to her was not the rank, but the quiet weight of responsibility that came with it, the lives tethered to her choices. She hadn't always been a soldier. Once, Sarah was a girl from the outskirts of Denver, the daughter of a steelworker and a schoolteacher, her world marked by the clang of machinery and the smell of chalk dust. She grew up watching her father come home with tired eyes and grease-stained hands, and her mother patiently marking papers deep into the night. From them, Sarah learned two things: work until your knuckles ache, and carry the weight of others with grace. It was after high school that she first walked into the recruiter's office, her heart pounding like a drum she couldn't quiet. She remembered the way the walls smelled faintly of coffee and paper, and how the man behind the desk leaned forward when she said she wasn't here for scholarships or college brochures. She wanted something else. She wanted to test the edges of her strength. She wanted to serve. Years later, she would laugh softly at the memory of how young and unpolished she had been, a girl still learning how to lace her boots without fumbling. But in those early days of training, something hard and unshakable began to form inside her. Every mile run, every blister, every breathless night lying in her bunk with muscles screaming, hammered her spirit into steel. Sarah never bragged about being the only woman in her unit. To her, survival wasn't about proving a point. It was about proving herself worthy of the uniform, of the brothers and sisters who would stand at her side in places where death often breathed down the back of their necks. She was sharper than most gave her credit for, quieter too. While others fought for recognition, Sarah fought for precision. She read every manual, studied every weapon, listened more than she spoke. Her path led her to special operations, an arena few women ever set foot in. There were whispers in the halls, doubts muttered in corners. She won't last. She's good, but not good enough. Sarah heard them all, every word scraping against her pride like sandpaper. But she carried those doubts like stones in her pack, letting the weight of them strengthen her stride instead of slowing it. It was there, in that crucible, that she found herself learning the art of the sniper's patience. Hours stretched into days on hillsides where the wind cut sharp and the sun scorched her skin. She learned how to read the earth, how to let her pulse sink with the stillness of the world, how to hold her breath until it felt like her chest might burst, all for a single clean shot. For Sarah, the rifle wasn't a weapon, it was an extension of her will, her steady hands, her refusal to yield. And yet, she was never hardened in the way some became. When the helmet came off, Sarah's eyes carried warmth. She wrote letters home when she could, her handwriting neat, sentences often starting with asterisk, "Don't worry, I'm safe." Asterisk. She carried a photograph of her little sister tucked into her chest pocket, the edges worn soft from being opened and folded too many times. War changed her, of course, it had to. She had seen lives cut short in sudden bursts of fire, had carried comrades out under skies burning red with tracer rounds. She had heard the cries of villagers caught between crossfires, had felt the tremor in her own hands after battles ended and silence returned too quickly. Each memory etched lines into her, deep and invisible. But Sarah never let the pain hollow her. Instead, she stored it like kindling, a reminder of why she had to keep going. That night, the one that would follow her forever, was still years away. But already, something inside her was preparing for it. Already, she was becoming the woman who would steady her rifle when even the best missed, who would not falter when every eye turned to her. Those who met Sarah after her service often spoke of her quietness, a calm presence that seemed to settle over a room like soft rain. But those who had stood with her in the dust and fire knew that her calm was forged, not gifted. They knew that beneath the gentleness was an unyielding spine. She was not without fear, she simply refused to let fear rule her. She had a way of pausing, even in conversation, as if measuring her words with the same care she once gave to aligning her crosshairs. And when she smiled, though it came rarely, it was not the smile of someone untouched by hardship, but the rare light of someone who had walked through darkness and still found the strength to offer warmth. In those beginnings, no one could have guessed the legend she would become. No one could have known that there would come a night when even the most seasoned SEAL snipers would falter, and the quiet woman they once doubted would be the one to change the course of everything. For now, she was still just Sarah, learning, striving, carrying her quiet determination like a secret flame. But already, the story of who she was destined to be had begun. The desert was merciless. By day, the sun seared the earth until heat shimmered off the sand like liquid glass. By night, the cold cut deep into the bone, reminding every soldier that nature could be as harsh an enemy as any man with a rifle. For Captain Sarah Whitmore, it was here, in the barren valleys of Afghanistan, that her resilience was tested in ways she never could have imagined. On one mission, her team was deployed to support a small village that had been caught in the grip of insurgents. The SEALs moved like shadows, scanning rooftops, alleys, every cracked doorway that might hide danger. Sarah, rifle in hand, carried the weight of silence. A sniper's role was often to wait, to watch, to carry the patience others could not afford. But waiting, she discovered, could be its own torment. That night, she lay in a shallow nest of rocks, the barrel of her rifle steady against the earth. Through the scope, she watched the flicker of lanterns in the village, her heartbeat ticking like a drum in her ears. Somewhere in those narrow streets, men were planting explosives. Somewhere in the darkness, the enemy's eyes searched for her team. She could hear their movements in the distance, the crunch of boots, the whispered commands, and she willed herself into stillness, even as her muscles trembled with the weight of hours. "Hold your fire, Wit," came the voice through her earpiece, firm but calm. She exhaled, slow, controlled. Snipers learned not only how to shoot, but how to wait until the shot mattered most. And sometimes, waiting meant living with the sight of things you couldn't change in the moment. The first blast shook the earth beneath her, a ripple of fire tearing through the edge of the village. Children screamed, women cried out, and Sarah's hands clenched the rifle tighter. Her chest ached with the helplessness of it, watching destruction unfold through a lens she could not yet act upon. She swallowed hard, blinking against the dust and the sting of her own fury. By dawn, the firefight was over. Smoke curled into the pale sky, and Sarah walked the charred streets with her team. She remembered stepping over debris, the smell of burning wood mixing with blood, her boots crunching on glass. A boy no older than 12 sat against a wall, his arm bandaged with a strip of cloth, his eyes wide and unblinking. She crouched beside him, offered him a bottle of water, and in that moment the war felt impossibly heavy. Later, back at base, she sat alone, cleaning her rifle with meticulous care. Every swipe of the cloth across the barrel was both ritual and penance. Her hands moved steadily, but her mind replayed the screams, the fire, the boy's silent gaze. She had chosen this life. She had trained for it. Yet nothing in training could teach you how to carry the weight of watching innocent lives caught in the crosshairs of someone else's war. It was not the only time Sarah found herself breaking quietly inside. Weeks turned into months, and with them came missions that blurred together in a haze of dust, gunfire, and exhaustion. She lost comrades, men she had trained with, laughed with, trusted with her life. Some fell in sudden bursts of chaos, others were lifted away on helicopters, their blood staining the stretchers beneath them. At night, when the world was finally still, Sarah lay on her cot staring at the ceiling of the tent, the whir of distant generators filling the silence. Sometimes her hands trembled, not from fear but from the relentless strain of being unshakable for too long. She kept her letters home light, never mentioning the nightmares that dragged her awake, never admitting how heavy her chest felt when she looked at the faces of the ones who didn't return. Doubt became a shadow she carried. Was she truly strong enough? Was she only proving those whispers right, that she didn't belong among men who had been born for war? There were moments, rare but piercing, when Sarah questioned why she was here at all. And yet, each morning, she rose. She laced her boots with steady hands, even when those hands shook minutes before. She pressed her cap down against the desert wind and stepped back into the fray, because the uniform demanded it, because her team depended on it, because she had promised herself she would not be the one who broke. Her struggle was not just with the enemy, but with herself, with the weight of being doubted, the burden of expectation, the silent vow to endure. And through it all, Sarah carried her quiet strength like a hidden ember. She would not know it then, but every night she survived, every doubt she pushed through, every moment she held steady when the world demanded she break. These were the trials that prepared her for the night when even the most skilled SEAL snipers missed. And when that night came, when the burden shifted fully onto her shoulders, she would remember these struggles, not as failures, but as the crucible that had shaped her into the woman who would not miss. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that presses against the skin and makes every sound feel sharper. Captain Sarah Whitmore lay prone on the ridge, her cheek against the stock of her rifle, breath measured, heartbeat steady. Below her, the valley sprawled like a dark canvas stitched with faint trails of moonlight. Somewhere in that darkness, an enemy squad moved with deadly precision, and the lives of her team, and dozens of villagers, hung in the balance. The SEAL snipers had taken their positions hours earlier. They were the best, trained in angles and distances that defied belief. But tonight, the wind shifted erratically, gusts tearing unpredictably through the valley, warping trajectories. Shots rang out, clean, controlled, and yet, one by one, the bullets missed their mark. The enemy pushed forward, shadows darting across the ridgeline, their movement purposeful and terrifying. Through her scope, Sarah watched them advance, her lungs tight. She could hear the comms crackle with clipped voices, frustration edged with fear. Missed. Adjusting. Still moving. She knew what it meant. The enemy would soon flank, and once they did, her team would be exposed. A voice came through, low and urgent. "Whit, you've got the angle. Take it if you can." Her finger rested against the trigger guard. For a moment, the world narrowed to the glass circle of her scope, the rise and fall of a target's chest, the faint glint of metal in the moonlight. Her breath slowed, every inhale measured, every exhale drawn thin. Time stretched, thick and unyielding. She thought of the hours on windswept ridges, of the doubt she had carried, of the weight of those who believed she didn't belong. This was the moment they had all unknowingly prepared her for. She squeezed the trigger. The first shot cracked through the silence, sharp and decisive. The figure through her scope staggered, then fell. Her body did not flinch. She adjusted, exhaled, fired again. Another figure dropped. The SEALs' voices broke through her earpiece, surprise mingling with relief. But Sarah barely heard them. She was locked in, every movement instinctive, her body an extension of the rifle. The recoil pressed against her shoulder, steady and familiar, grounding her with each shot. One by one, the enemy squad fell beneath her precision. There was no hesitation now, no tremor of doubt. Every breath was a calculation, every pull of the trigger a promise fulfilled. The air was filled with the staccato rhythm of controlled fire, and in less than 5 minutes, the valley was still again. Silence returned, broken only by the hiss of the wind. Her hands lowered the rifle slowly, her chest rising and falling with deliberate calm. She could feel the sweat cooling on her back, the ache in her muscles from holding so perfectly still. For a long moment, she simply lay there, listening to her own heartbeat. Then, in her earpiece, targets neutralized. All clear. Damn, Whit. You just took out the whole squad. She closed her eyes briefly, the weight of the words settling on her. She hadn't done it for recognition. She hadn't done it to silence the whispers or prove anyone wrong. She had done it because there had been no other choice. Because when it came down to life or death, she refused to let fear decide for her. Later, when she walked back into camp, the men looked at her differently. Not with the grudging acceptance of before, not with the shadow of doubt she had carried for so long. Their nods were quiet, respectful, almost reverent. One of the SEAL snipers clapped her shoulder, his voice low. "Hell of a shot. Hell of a lot of shots." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held no arrogance, only relief. But when she sat alone that night, her rifle resting against the wall of her tent, the adrenaline drained away, leaving only the stillness. She thought of the faces through her scope, the men who had fallen because her hands had not faltered. She knew their intent had been deadly, that they would have shown her team no mercy. And yet, the weight of taking lives pressed against her chest all the same. She paused, letting the memory wash over her, the echo of gunfire lingering in her ears. Her hands trembled now, in the quiet where no one could see. She pulled the photograph of her little sister from her pocket, tracing the worn edges with her thumb. In that small act, she anchored herself, not to the violence of what she had done, but to the reason she had done it. To protect, to endure, to carry the weight so others wouldn't have to. That night changed everything. Not because she became a legend whispered about in the barracks, not because her name would later be cited in reports as the reason her team survived, but because it was the moment she realized that her quiet strength, long doubted and often overlooked, was enough. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to prove anything with bravado. Her actions had spoken, clear and unshakable, in the language only soldiers truly understood. And from that night forward, Captain Sarah Whitmore would carry not just the weight of her struggles, but the unyielding knowledge that she had faced the impossible, and she had not missed. Years later, the desert was only a memory, though it lived in her bones like an echo she could never quite silence. Captain Sarah Whitmore had traded her uniform for civilian clothes, her rifle for the rhythm of quieter days. She lived in a modest house on the edge of a small town in Colorado, where the mountains rose steady against the sky, unchanging, immovable, a reminder of the strength she had once drawn upon in far harsher landscapes. To most neighbors, she was simply Sarah, the woman who walked her dog each morning, who volunteered at the library, who smiled kindly at the children racing their bikes down the street. Few knew the weight she carried, the battles that had carved themselves into her memory. And Sarah preferred it that way. She had never sought the spotlight. She had only ever wanted to serve. Still, there were nights when sleep would not come easily. The silence of her home was sometimes pierced by echoes, the crack of a rifle, the sudden blast of an explosion, the haunting faces of men she had seen fall through her scope. On those nights, she would sit by the window with a mug of tea, watching the stars scatter across the sky, grounding herself in the quiet truth that she had survived. Her struggles did not end when the war did. Like many veterans, Sarah wrestled with the invisible wounds, the guilt of surviving when others had not, the question of whether she had done enough, the restless energy that came from years of being always on guard. She attended therapy, slowly learning to give voice to what she had kept locked away. She found solace in writing, filling journals with thoughts she once might have hidden, sentences that began with "I remember," and ended with small fragments of hope. When she spoke publicly, it was never about the number of missions or the night she had taken out the squad alone. Instead, she spoke about the quiet resilience required to come home and rebuild. People think strength is about never breaking, she once told a group of high school students. But real strength is in finding the courage to heal, to keep moving forward even when your heart feels heavy. Her words carried a weight that silence could not. Young women often approached her afterward, eyes shining with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. They asked her how she had endured, how she had stood where so many doubted she could. Sarah always answered with gentleness. You don't have to be the loudest to be strong. Sometimes, the quietest ones carry the heaviest burdens, and they carry them well. Her family saw the changes in her, too. Her younger sister, now grown with children of her own, often reminded Sarah of the photograph she had carried through every mission. You kept me with you, her sister once said softly, holding her hand. And I think, in some way, that's what brought you home. Sarah smiled at that, a quiet, knowing smile. For all the battles she had fought, it was the thought of home, the people she loved, that had kept her steady when the world seemed determined to break her. She found healing in small rituals. Gardening became one of them, her hands pressing seeds into the soil, watching life rise slowly, steadily, from the earth. It reminded her that growth takes time, that patience and care could coax beauty out of even the hardest ground. She often told friends that tending to her garden felt like tending to her soul, fragile in places, resilient in others, always needing light. The memory of that night, the one that defined her, never faded. But over time, its sharp edges softened. She no longer saw it as a weight pressing down on her, but as proof of who she had become. The whispers that once doubted her had long been silenced. What remained was the quiet truth that when the moment came, she had stood unshaken. On the anniversary of her retirement, Sarah was invited to speak at a veterans' gathering. Standing at the podium, she paused before she began, letting the weight of the moment settle. Her voice, when it came, was steady but warm. "I'm not here to tell you a story of heroics," she said. "I'm here to tell you that every one of us carries battles no one else can see. What matters is not how others measure your strength, but how you choose to carry it. I once faced a night where the best of the best couldn't make the shot. And I did. But that moment doesn't define me as much as what came after, the choice to live, to heal, to give back." The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. Sarah let the silence linger, the way she once had on ridges with her rifle, measuring her breath. Then she finished softly. "You don't have to be unbreakable to be strong. You just have to keep choosing to rise." The applause that followed was gentle, not roaring, but full of respect, the kind that recognized not just what she had done, but who she had become. Later that night, Sarah sat in her garden beneath the stars, a soft wind stirring the leaves. She closed her eyes, letting the memory of the desert fade into the background. Her hands no longer trembled. Her heart, though still scarred, felt lighter. In that quiet moment, Captain Sarah Whitmore was simply Sarah again, grateful, grounded, and alive. And that, she knew, was victory enough.